But one thing I've seen is that sometimes the biggest bully we ever deal with is not external, it's internal.
Mm.
And that bully will make us repress emotions because we don't want to have to confront what we're going through or that we're not managing. Or the biggest bully might be the imposter syndrome. Or it might be just the I'm stressed all the time. I'm trying to do everything. No one can do it as good as I can. So I have to, micromanage just the way it is. And then we get to the statement of it is what it is. It is what it is a complete misnomer, false belief. Because if you buy into it is what it is, well, then it's going to just continue that way. But sometimes you have to say, hang on a minute. I'm too much in this business. I got to step back. I got to work on the business, not in it.
Mm.
And if we don't confront the stuff, we push it down the road, and then we find, like you found yourself, I did when I was in my 20s. We're in A&E with a suspected heart
Mm.
attack. Well, that happened to me anyway. I was in A&E, and they thought it was curtains. And that's the thing. If we push it down the road long enough, it'll always come back and bite you. But the longer you leave it, the harder it is to confront.
Welcome to the Inner Entrepreneur podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I'm delighted to chat to you. It's funny, as I was thinking about this podcast, and you've been a high performance life coach for 20 years now. I was nearly going to call you a celebrity coach, but that'd be awful because we do see your face on morning television.
Yeah, you wouldn't know where it'd pop up, but yeah.
You wouldn't know where you'd pop up. And look, you've done this for 20 years. You've written books. You've spoken on stages all over the world. But I crossed my mind recently that the title of life coach, I think in the last couple of years, somehow has been cheapened. And here's why I think it's been cheapened. You can have a go at me on this.
I'm agreeing with you here. I'm agreeing with you. It's funny because I suppose I'd first and foremost be an executive coach. So that'd be a business coach. But of course, when you said people that, when I went on the world of social media, so people are like, what's an executive coach? Is that just for executive? And because when I work with people, personal and professional development and working with business owners, business leaders, self-employed people, that's who I work with. That's 99% of my clients. And, from the army of 10 to the army of 1,000 staff. But it's funny because when I went on, I suppose I've been on TV, as you mentioned, a few other things, they would say, life coach and whatever else have you. And that's all, as well and good. But the reason it came about was, it was funny. Whenever I'm working with people on their business mindset and their strategy and just the whole kind of thing, we always end up working on the person behind the business. And so, the life and business coach name just kind of came along and stuck. But even though I'd have credentials and other things as well. But what's funny about it is now the name life coach, now 20 years ago, 15 years, 10 years ago, people are like, what's that? But now life coach, people are like, oh yeah, you can become that in 6 months. Do you know that kind of way? So it has been diluted, but I think any mark of any coach is the time spent in the arena. Experience will always trump, theory. 23 years this year I've been coaching. So yeah, I'm doing it a while.
I think you're right. And that's it. You kind of go, well, 6 months ago you were a hairdresser, and now you're a life coach. And
I know, listen, I've enough of them.
And you're 23 years of age. And okay, I'm an old guy at this age. I'm 60, so maybe I'm just a bit cynical, But it's like I'm kind of going, well, what's the thing I look for most in a life coach? It's a little fucking life experience.
100%. Yeah, 100%. You know what's interesting? I did work with the BBC. They reached out to me. I actually got an email. Funny story. I got an email in the inbox. I had bbc.co.uk, and I was like, "This is spam."
Yeah, someone's winding me up here. Yeah,
this is a wind up. I nearly didn't do it with it. I replied to the email and says, and the email was, "We were interested in working with you on, a project we have. Can't say too much. Well, we'd like to talk to you, etc." Anyway, I get talking to them. It turned out they were doing this expose on the world of life coaching and business coaching and the world of wellness. And they had this, I suppose, podcast that they wanted to kind of bring all this together on. And the whole idea was they wanted to investigate what is credible, what's not, what's good practice, what isn't, et cetera, et cetera. And they wanted me to kind of be part of that spearhead of kind of guiding them because they knew I've been doing it a long time. But the funny thing they said to me was, they said, it's very hard to find a coach that's doing it as long as you. And they said, we've looked into your credentials, et cetera, et cetera. And they said, a lot of these coaches are popping up, and that's the scary side. The amazing thing about that podcast, it became #1 podcast in the world for like a week, which is it was called A Very British Cult.
Wow.
They investigated Yeah, it's very, very, it's powerful. I'm on episode, I think, 6 or 8 or something. But bottom line was, and I had to work with them for a lot, but it was like your kind of 2 minutes of fame with the BBC. But it was on BBC One and all that kind of stuff. But they investigated a particular life coaching company that was basically I mean, it was a cult at the end of the day. It was horrendous. And it just, by working with them, it opened my eyes to how people can use these terminologies, but there may be no depth behind it. And I always think, a word to the wise for anyone: you look at how long they've got skin in the game. Do they have experience in what they're trying to coach you with? Like, there's no point someone who is a business coach who's never run a business.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It just doesn't make sense. And so yeah, so to agree with you, yeah, the name has been diluted, and I just kind of stick with the high performance coach now in the world of business. That's what most people tend to call me.
Yeah, I think another sign of it is that when people are more interested in your money than helping you. And by the way, I'm not suggesting for a moment that that someone shouldn't charge for their services. Absolutely, they should. If you're good at what you do, yeah, you deserve that. But if someone simply goes to your website, they can download a free ebook, so don't have to pay Mark anything for that. And when you look at some of your online programs, even for people who don't want to or can't afford to hire you personally,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not going to say they're for nothing, but they're like, what, €30 or something for one of your programs, you know what I
Oh,
mean?
it's very, very cost effective. I mean, to be honest, that's why I brought it online, because I wanted to make it accessible,
Yeah.
because I know what it's like years ago when I started my company, a company of one, sole trader, business owner. I know what it's like to when you're starting at that place. And thankfully I was a coach trying to build a coaching business. So I had obviously the business strategies behind me, which was really, really good. But I remember working with people who were starting out, startups, didn't have money. And I said, I want to make this accessible, because then one day when they do, eventually get there, they might go, actually, you know what? That fella gave me a lot of free stuff. I might go back to him now that I have a team of 20 people. So, there was method in the madness, but as well, I never, it was funny with coaching, I kind of fell into it, but it was always a labor of love, and it was passion first, kind of, think about profit later. And I know that sounds kind of, oh, that's lovely, but it legit was. I was a volunteer for years working as career help with, young people and college students. And I just volunteered my time, and that's what I did. And then obviously people got results, and it turned out quite well. And then obviously said, I need to make this a business because the demand was too high, and it just became a full-on career. And then, yeah, 23 years later, here we are. But I always say that to people, it's the worst thing to not, if you're feeling stuck or you're not sure what the next move is, or you're just kind of thinking overwhelmed, the worst thing to do is to sit in that. Take a step in any direction is better than staying put in the one you're in. And if that's free resources, start there. If that's trying different people, start there. But take a step is the key. So I always try and have stuff out there where people can just consume it. It's like the Instagram, a lot of people come through the doors on the Instagram. Thankfully, the following has kind of grown, but a lot of people come through there and just kind of want to take the free stuff and go. And I'm like, that's what it's there for, So yeah.
But I think also people get the opportunity to consume the free stuff, and they get two things. They go, well, this guy actually seems genuine. You know what I mean? He seems like a legit individual, and also they get to experience the credibility of what you're teaching. So they get to consume a lot of it before they get to a stage of working with you in person. 23 years. Take us back to the very early days. I'm 23 years ago. We didn't have the same level of online activity. You probably couldn't train as a life coach in a weekend. So what was it? What was it? I mean, was it a personal journey? What led you into this as a career?
Yeah, well, do you know what? I'll go back further just to give you the picture. Essentially, back in not to give you the life story, so I'll keep it quick. But I was in school. I was bullied badly for a number of years, physically, mentally, verbally. It was horrendous. It was kind of all aspects. And I remember one day I got new shoes. And we didn't come from a lavish background or anything like that. So new shoes was a big deal, So I got these new shoes, went to school with these new shoes. It was a new term. And I was about 10 or something like that. Well, no, I was about 11 at this point. And the teacher says, "Oh, you've lovely new shoes. Oh, they look great, Mark. Well done. You look great." Blah, blah. And all I could think about was I couldn't take the compliment. I was only 10 now or 9. But I couldn't take the compliment because I kept thinking the bullies in the class, because they've been bullying me previous years, they've heard that I'm now a target. That's what they're going to go after today. I'm coming home from school. The lads grab me. They say, "We have dog's dirt and you're going to stand in it. Let's see what the new shoes are like," and made me stand in the dog's dirt. And I remember I was so upset. I went, because these were brand new, day one new shoes. Went home, granny sees them, said, don't tell your mother, cleans the shoes, and that's fine. My mother never knew the story. And I remember something inside me going, I can't take this anymore. I just can't take this anymore. And, you know, I did take it for another year. And so I was 10 to 11. And I was about 12 when I was going into then secondary school. And I said, new school, secondary school, I'll just hold out till then, because I was small, skinny, small fella. I couldn't stand up to the bullies. There was too many of them. I go to a new school. I go into the school gates, where we put the bikes, and the bully's standing there, and he goes, oh, we're going to have fun with you, Fennell. I didn't know you were going to this school as well. And something in me said, I can't take it anymore. I don't have like, oh, I'm out in a year, can't take it. 10 o'clock break comes. He goes to flick a cigarette at me, which he used to always do. New uniform, let's put some air holes in it. And he goes to flick it, and I said, don't you dare. And I just let her roar, don't you dare. Don't know what. Now I'm only 12. Don't ask him about me. Told him, don't you dare. And in my head, I was like, what am I doing? But I just couldn't take it anymore. And I think sometimes what I learned from that, and what I know now, when the pain of staying the same is greater than the pain it's going to take to change, you will then go and change. And I said, the pain of staying the same will be 6 years in this school. And he didn't bully me. Obviously, it was quite a loud confrontation. Don't know where the brave came from. And he never bullied me again. And I realized you don't have to put up with stuff. And then fast forward, I started to work on my self-confidence. I started to believe myself that I could look after myself, take care, etc., etc. And then fast forward, I get to a place where my parents were involved with a charity work, doing youth work, and they asked me to come along. I get involved, and by osmosis, I saw people there who were my own age, and I saw that I had someone to believe, because when I broke through that bully thing and I started to believe in myself, and I got, good people around me, so to speak, as best you can at 13, I just started to realize you don't have to believe in yourself and you can overcome it. That was my little thing that went through my head. I started helping them, and then it progressed on from there, where we started to get breakthroughs. I worked with one guy who was a ringleader, gang leader, so to speak, because this is an inner city, it was a rough area. And he said, if I live beyond 21, I'll have more than most. Because my mum always said, please make it to your 21st, because he said his older brother never did because of drugs. And I said, that's as far as he's thinking ahead. And I said, but what if we thought to 25, 30, 31, what's the dream? And he said, and I was like kind of helping him with that. And I couldn't always understand that. Sadly, his mindset was so limited. I didn't even know call it mindset then. I was only young in my 20s. And I said, what would be? He goes, to get a house and to get my mother a dog, because we can't have dogs in the flats, etc. Fast forward 6 years later, I'm walking into the RDS to where we match. This big guy comes forward, big security fella on the security gear, and he says, Fennell, is that you? Mark Fennell, is that you? And I said, yeah. And he gets upset emotionally, and I'm like, I know this guy. It was the same young lad.
Wow.
And he said, only for you, he said, I wouldn't be here today. Obviously, he's in his 20s now at this stage. And he said to me, he says, I got out of that area. He said, we got a house, me and the missus, and have a baby. He says, and I got me mad dog.
Wow.
And he just broke down. Now, this guy's 6'4". And I said, and we're talking. And I said, what are you doing here? He goes, oh, I'm head of security because, no better man than myself to know who we're for. And it was at that moment I said, I'm going to do this the rest of my life. Don't know how I'm going to make it work, but it's going to be a business. And at that stage, I was already on the coaching journey, learning studying psychology, etc. And that's when I said, boom. And that's how I started. And that's what has kind of fueled me on. And as I got older, the clients got older. And I started to work with companies and word of mouth and whatever else have you. And there was no social media, no, purely word of mouth. But I did start a blog, and the blog took off quite well, the articles. And then eventually I brought out to social media. And anyway, here we are.
Would we spoke earlier about how we can trivialize the term life coach. But when you have an impact on someone like that, and you can be that moment of change in their life where they realize what the potential they have inside of them. I mean, that's an extraordinary thing to do. But I want to go back to the bullying a little bit, because a few reasons. One is, you said in that moment that you just had enough. And before we came on air, we spoke about that we both had heart scares that had come from stress. And it was after that for me that was when I said, I've had enough. I've had enough. The how I'm running this business is killing me. I hate it, and I need to turn it into something I love. But it had reached a point for me where I literally had enough. I thought I was going to die from a heart attack.
Mm.
And so there's two interesting things in me. One is, and you, sorry, and you as a 12-year-old boy, I mean, so the thing about you standing up to him, which is a great story, but you could have done it years earlier. And by the way, years earlier, I could have changed it, but I left it to a point of fucking can't take this anymore. And you left it to a point. So I don't know. Why is it? Why is it? Why do we leave it to that point? Why do we suffer so much before we go, enough is enough?
And it's and it's the moral story with life. You know what I mean? This with business, with confrontation, with dealing with difficult people, with scenarios, relationships, all sorts of things. The same principle applies. I think what happens for me, for a lot of us, is we put it off. We procrastinate. Oh, I'll deal with that when, because the mental overwhelm to confront it there and then is too much. We think, I'm not able for that. I'm not able to carry that. So we procrastinate. We put it off. And for me, I was like, oh, I'll be out of school in a year.
Yeah.
I just have to just get through the year, just get through the year. So it was kind of a countdown. And I think sometimes we live in this, sometimes hope is a great thing, but false hope is a bad thing. And false hope that, oh, it's going to change someday. Well, if you do nothing, it's never going to change. Because if you change nothing, nothing changes. And I think I've currently learned to realize that. And I got to a place of, I'm in a new school with 6 years to go with this. And this guy is going to do the same old that he's been doing for the previous 3, unless I change something. And all I knew in me was something just broke and said, I am not putting up with this anymore, even if I get battered. Even if I have to fight the David and Goliath fight, I'm going to fight the fight, because I cannot just put up and shut up like I have been. And so, like I say, the pain to stay the same was far greater now than what the pain might have been to change it. And I just stood up. Thankfully, I got away unscathed and it worked out well. But that happens with so much in life. We are in a routine, hamster on a wheel. We're go, go, go. I mean, I work predominantly with, as you know, business leaders and owners, and there are so many spinning plates. And they're in that kind of circling pattern, like the plane over the airport. They're just going around and around and around. And sometimes you have to say, hang on a minute, are you happy on this flight? Or do we need to land the plane, take stock, and set a new trajectory? And it's not the big changes that mean the most. It's sometimes the small changes done consistently over time that make the most difference. So we start small. But one thing I've seen is that sometimes the biggest bully we ever deal with is not external, it's internal. And that bully will make us repress emotions because we don't want to have to confront what we're going through, or that we're not managing. Or the biggest bully might be the imposter syndrome, or it might be just I'm stressed all the time. I'm trying to do everything. No one can do it as good as I can. So I have to, micromanage just the way it is. And then we get to the statement of, it is what it is. It is what it is a complete misnomer or false belief. Because if you buy into it is what it is, well, then it's going to just continue that way. But sometimes you have to say, hang on a minute. I'm too much in this business. I got to step back. I got to work on the business, not in it. And if we don't confront the stuff, we push it down the road. And then we find, like you found yourself, I did when I was in my 20s, we're in A&E with a suspected heart attack. Well, that happened to me anyway. I was in A&E and they thought it was curtains. And that's the thing. If we push it down the road long enough, it'll always come back and bite you. But the longer you leave it, the harder it is to confront.
Yeah, and I think that's really important. Like if you change nothing, nothing changes. So if someone's listening to this, and by the way, I'm going to say everyone listening to this will resonate with some of this, because whether you own a business or whether you don't, we all experience stress, we all experience anxiety, we all experience overwhelm, and partly they're part of life. So there's no magic pill where you go, do this and you're superhuman. That doesn't happen to anyone. But you can create a much better quality of life. And I think what you're saying is that and if someone is driving their car, listening to this or watching on YouTube, and they will be brought to whatever it is going on in their life. That's the Goliath that they have to face now. And I suppose
I'll give you an example. So I love cars, right? I'm mad into cars and racing, and some of the family have been into it and whatever. And I remember there's 2 things. The first thing was this. I did rally experience years ago. Now, I'm not a rally driver, but we did the experience. You jump in the car and you think you're Colin McRae. I jumped in the car and we did the test lap. And then he puts me in the driver's seat. And the co-pilot says to me, he says, where you look is where you're going to end up. So he said, don't look where you don't want to end up. He says, because you're going to look at the tree to avoid the tree. You're going to look at the ditch to avoid the ditch. He says, you'll most likely with speed end up there. You got to look where you want to end up. So he said, that was the thing. And I always remember that was such a metaphor for life. So many of us are looking at where we're at in the business, but we're not actually looking at where we're going. So we end up just repeating the same old, same old, same old, without ever growing or moving and hoping that it's just going to change, because time will make it change. Time doesn't change anything. It just makes things worse if they're bad already.
Mm.
And I remember that, look where you want to go. But the second thing is, I remember a family member of mine was doing race driving in Mondello, and they were doing like drift games and stuff like that. And you had this car that could go X speed, and that's all it could do. That was its capacity. But then you ask the person, you know, that knows cars, and they could come along and say, oh, it does that speed now, but if we change the suspension, she'll hold quicker in the corners. If we chip it and we mess with the ECU in the car, we can make it actually pump out a bit more revs. It'll go a bit faster. So the same car could now go, after it got the work done on it, it could now go and perform faster. But without that mechanic, we'd never know that. And that's why I say, you know, we talk about coaching. That's what coaching does. It comes along and says, how can we make this car run more efficiently, run faster, without trying to change everything? And sometimes we need someone to change our mental capacity, because when we're in a business, we think there is no more time. There is nothing I can change. I am stuck and I hate this job. But when you get another set of eyes in that comes in that is used to helping people expand, grow, or alternate, and that's the difference. The worst thing to do is to say nothing can be done.
I agree. And the thing I find most with business owners is that this notion that, as you say, they're stuck in their business and they have an idea how the business can be. And there's nothing, there's no other picture of what it can be. And sometimes what you just need is a chink in that armor. You just need to present something different and go, but what if? What could it be like? And I know, I mean, over the years, I have had many, many mentors and coaches, and at different times in my life for different things, because they brought, and looking back over the years, they've brought so much to me. And often I went into a session with a mentor or coach, and I did 90% of the talking. But they just asked a question. But two things: they asked a question, and secondly, in the talking, when you're speaking to someone else who's not your wife or your parent or whatever, you see, when I say the foolishness, I don't mean that in a derogatory way, but you see the nonsense of some of what you're saying. You know what I mean? You go, okay. Well, you recognize yourself.
Yeah, I mean, talking is therapy, you know. When we hear ourselves out loud, we kind of go, God, that sounds a lot worse than it was in my head, you know.
That's the point, yeah.
I think when it comes to coaching, I think in general, or even just having a mentor, you know, the way it works is the coach doesn't bring the solutions and go, look, just do this, this, and this, and you'll be fine. It's not like the GP in a prescription, you know. It's more perspective, but it's more, a good coach doesn't bring answers. A good coach brings good questions. Because when the answer comes from me, it's one thing. But when the answer comes from you in your business, that's where it comes with like a revelation. And it's not just a aha moment. It's oh, I get it now. Because I do believe most answers for most businesses, the person already knows. They just never seen it or tapped into it. And you need that other perspective. And that's why talking is key, and asking clever questions is also. I remember, I'll give you a quick story. I was coaching a business owner, and she owned a couple of corner shops. She had a bit of a franchise going on. She'd 4 shops when she started with me. And she said, I'm out the door, I'm in the shops trying to clean them, they trying to do this, she said, I'm doing all the stupid stops because no one could do the jobs right, you know? And she would blame the team, and she blamed everything else. And I said, you're blaming the team. And I said, I get it. And I had a conversation with her, and we looked at her schedule, and she was working mad hours a week, no life, no quality of life. Cholesterol was through the roof, blood pressure was high, and all this kind of stuff. Anyway, long and the short of it, I said to her this, I said, we can't make more hours in the day. I said, but we can make this machine work a lot more efficiently. I said, you're blaming the team. I said, let's have a look at that. And we sat down. And by the end of that conversation, she wasn't blaming the team anymore. She said, this is me. This is me. I'm micromanaging. I haven't put in SOPs. No one has API to beat the band. It's all in my head. She says, no one knows what's going on. We restructured it. She now works 4 days a week, and she now has 17 shops.
Wow.
And so she couldn't see how she could run 4. Now she's 17 shops. And she is only working 4 days a week. She's a family, etc. And that was not changing necessarily the team. We didn't change the team. We changed the systems, and we changed her way of mentally dealing with it and mentally viewing her business. She was viewing it as a worker bee. She wasn't viewing it as a queen bee. And there's a very big difference. And with that, it transformed everything. So she is now at a place that she would have never got to if she had never done anything about it. But she reached out saying, I'm overwhelmed, I'm burnt out. What do? I have a mortgage. I have to work, but I hate it. She says, she got sick one time and was in hospital for a few days. And she said, Mark, am I the first person ever to look forward to going to hospital?
Yeah.
Because I knew it was a forced stop. And I said, isn't that a bad place? But that's not the first time I've heard that. I heard a person who's getting an operation done on a knee, and he said, I'll be glad of the rest because I won't stop otherwise unless something makes me stop. That's a bad way to be.
I'm going to put my hands up here. I remember many years ago having a small operation that took me out of action for a couple of days.
Yeah.
And feeling that I could switch off my phone, I could switch off everything. I mean, you're talking 2 days. It was something minor. And I was thinking, I can switch off everything and without expectation and without guilt. And it wasn't that anyone in the office actually gave a shit whether they could contact me for it. Genuinely wasn't. Yeah. It was me going, look, hey, I'm injured. I'm on crutches. I mean, now I can justify now not being contactable, while I'm on an anesthetic or while I'm in a hospital bed. And when I look at it, it's laughable to me now. But that was all me. The reality is in a lot of these situations is if you've hired very capable people, you say they want the opportunity to do more and do better. But when you talk about the queen bee and the kind of worker bee, the difference is, in my view, from my own personal experience, is when you start a business, and if you start a business with nothing, you have to be that worker.
100%.
You have to do. Look, you've started a business. You have to do that.
100%.
But that skill, it's well said, what got you here won't get you there. But that skill won't transfer to a bigger business. And I think this is people think, oh, I have the skill. I'm a great carpenter. I'm a great plumber. I'm a great, whatever it is. And I go, yes, that's a great skill. And it takes you that far. And if you want to move to being a business owner, it's an entirely different way of thinking.
It's a different mindset. And this is what I work with people a lot on. It's when we get to that precipice, you've hit a ceiling. Your capacity is maxed. We just need to know what adjustments can we make to the same car that it runs smarter, not harder. You know what I mean? That it's getting the same mileage, but for, less impact. And so that's the difference. That's where people get to. So it's going from the worker bee to the queen bee mindset, if we put it like that, or even putting like, it's going from being in the business to now being on the business. And people struggle with that because we're so conditioned and trained to work hard, pay the bills, and whatever else. And when we get into a place of we have staff, all we're doing is now just emulating us to them, and we delegate, but we don't empower. And there's a massive difference between that. Delegating is giving someone a job, you go do ABC, but empowerment is, here's ABC. Now, how do you see it being done? Because the ideal is you surround yourself with better people than you. That's true scaling. And that's when you can step back and then be kind of in the know. People find it hard to do that. It's the fear. Can I let this person go with this? Can I empower them? I remember a very well-known CEO and in a marketing campaign or whatever else, but I was involved in the team, and they were running this marketing campaign at the time. And I couldn't get over how at his level, he was so involved in the micro stuff. And I mean, I'm not saying it's bad. You got to look at the things, but he would get caught up on a font and not let the marketing team do it. And the environment to work in was a fearful environment. I think we should talk about that just for a minute. But the environment was an environment of, okay, keep everyone happy and we keep our job. It was all delegation, not empowerment. It was management, not leadership. And what happened was he was so he had this fear environment, and everyone would just, whatever made him happy. And there's an element I get of that in a structure. But here was the interesting thing. I said, because I had an opportunity to do this, and I said, there's an environment of fear. If they do wrong, they lose their job. There's not an environment for growth. If we make a mistake, we learn and we move and do better. And I painted the picture. I said, if someone does wrong, they're in fear of losing their job, but that's the mindset that we got to do. So we tried to do away. We had to take them out of the micromanaging. I said, you got to just empower people. These are marketing experts. They're doing it better and longer than you, and they know the font better than you do, right? And he found it so hard to get to that place. But when he got to that place, ironically, and this is now I'm working with him a long time, he comes back. Do you know my blood pressure's down? Do you know my cholesterol's down? Do you know I'm sleeping better? I'm not taking sleeping tablets and all this kind of stuff. I said, because now you've empowered people. And I think we really struggle. It's the fear of, if I empower them and they make a mistake, oh, we're screwed. No, if you empower them and they make a mistake and they're good people, they'll learn and not make it again. And they'll only get better in time, because that's their area to look at, not like you trying to look at all the areas.
But that's also learning, and as you transition, because I did it myself, as you transition out of that operational day-to-day involvement, newsflash, you are going to make mistakes. You're going to get things wrong. People are going to get things wrong. You're going to have people that are not the job that you're going to have to fire. And so the notion that you can transition and it will all be perfect, well, that's a delusion. And when you set yourself up with that delusion, the problem is now you think I'm doing it wrong. Instead of going, no, this is the path. I'm learning a new skill. It took me 4 years to learn my trade or get my qualification. Now I'm learning this skill. But the culture of empowerment, I would say that, when I had went off the rails many years ago and decided, look, I hate this business. I have to do something. I have to do something with it. The biggest change I had to make was the culture in the company, because it was a horrible place for me to work in. But newsflash, there were 20 other people working there as well. How do you think it was like?
100%.
What do you think it was like for them? So if I owned the company and I was going in and going, I hate this shit, I'm doing it. Like, what were they dealing with? And
You can imagine.
I had to wake up and go, but there's only one person responsible for this, and it's me. And it's me because I set the tone, I set the culture, and ultimately I hire and I fire. And when I must have, a while ago, I sat at the table and I'm looking around the table, there were about 4 or 5 CEOs. The biggest challenge, they were all complaining about the people in their business. And the biggest hurdle to get them over was to put the hand up and go, if I have a shit culture in my business, it's on me. And it changes when I take responsibility for it.
Mm-hmm. It's true. And I think it's the control piece. It's your business. In other words, it's your baby, and you just want it to be, I suppose, the best it can be. And a lot of us hate relinquishing that control and handing it over to someone else, or we feel they might not do as well as we do. But, I always look at it this way and say, let's suppose they don't do it as well as you, right? You built that business, whatever it might be, that business better than anyone, and they're coming in and they're not with the same motivation as you. It's not their name over the door. But let's suppose they don't do it as well as you, and they do it 80%, right? 80% as well as you do, or even 60%. And supposing that they can't get it done in the time what you get done in an hour, they do it in 2. So it's done 60% and it takes 2 hours to do. Are they doing a job that is, an IMA, an income making activity? Are they doing a job that is fundamental to the job success or the business success? The bottom line is, by someone who's 60% as good as you and it takes twice as long to do it, how much do you cost per hour? Because your price is going to be far in excess of theirs. And the bottom line is, so, getting them to do the 60% quality over 2 hours, that might achieve even what you would achieve. But your hour is far more valuable to that company, because what do you cost the company per hour? And that hour needs to be spent a lot wiser or better than in the meeting about fonts.
Well, this is the point. When you have someone who's CEO of a company and they're talking about fonts, it's like they certainly need a slap in the head. But
it's red flag moment,
my kind of comeback on I hear what you're saying. Yeah, that's the case. Sometimes you go, well, he can only do 60%. When I find a CEO goes, well, they can't do it as well as I do, my thinking on that is, well, there's two potential problems there. One, it's either a training and development problem. In other words, it's a training and development problem. There's you haven't upskilled that person to the point where they can do it as good as you, or it's and that's just a skill, or it's an ability problem. And if it's an ability problem, then you've hired the wrong person. So you have two choices. You look and go, this person's never up to the job. Face up to that, move them on, get someone else, or train them. But so I mean, I know. I mean, I go into my office every year at Christmas, and as we finish up, I do a short talk to the staff. And, I stand in front of them this year, as I do most years, and I look at them all and go, they're a phenomenal group of people. They're just a phenomenal group of people. And every one of them does their job better than I would do it. There's no question. So if, I would be the 60% at any of their jobs, and they're all the
So it should be.
110%. But the truth of it is, probably none of them could do my job. So the gift there is recruit people who firstly fit your culture, who have a really great skill base, and then and then get off their back and do what you have to do. But the thing I'm thinking as you're talking about this, because we're getting to very operational stuff, and
Yeah.
and fundamental, which is good, because people do like tools, but fundamentally the problem comes down to the problem is you. And
More often than not,
what's the biggest? So when I sit in front of you and I give you all my operational problems, and you're going, Paul, we can talk all day about operational problems, but the operational problems are the freaking easy fix. I've done it 100 times. The problem is you. Two things, question. How do you get me to recognize the problem is me and acknowledge, and what's the big, when we get to that, what's the most common problem you're finding?
Well, let's talk about more of a larger business if we use it in that model. If like this CEO, he had a lot of staff. It was a big company and he was getting caught up in the small details. How do we know? If you took a month off, would your company fail, or would it succeed, or would it maintain? What would it do? Which of the three? Succeed as in grow? Would it maintain, stay the same, or would it fail? And if you say, oh, it would fail, well, then you're the problem, categorically. So if you're having to be present, and this is more in the medium business, but and larger, but if you're having to be present as a CEO and your business can't run without you, we're not saying no, do this, but if you have to be present, well, then you might be the problem, because there's standard operation procedures, etc., etc. But there's things that are coming back to you that probably shouldn't be. You need to be more the helicopter parent, as a, hovering over rather than kind of sitting with them. And don't get me wrong, there is a big piece on community and team, and you're part of the team. I get all that. I'm not saying separate yourself or anything, but that's what the first start, I'd say. And most people say, oh, I couldn't run without me. There's no way I could run without me. And what areas couldn't run without you? And that's when you'll figure out where the problem really, really lies. The second piece, I would say, when it comes to, you've read the book, I'm sure, Jim Collins, Good to Great, who's on your bus and whatever, who's on your bus, and so to speak, and efficiency. But the second thing that highlights if you're the problem is if you're overwhelmed, stressed, up at night, and you look at your business and you're just not, it's not giving you the kind of that contentment or even fulfillment, and you've lost the love for it, that also is saying that you're the problem. And when I say you're the problem, these are problems that can be fixed, and they're problems you may not be aware of. So it starts there. Self-awareness is the first piece. Is it them or is it me?
But I think it's the hardest piece.
It is. It is the hardest piece, because most people think it's them. To break out of that, it's looking at the business and it's going, right, what are the areas that, really quickly, what are the areas that I'm in that could be delegated? What are the things that I'm getting, the time vampires, what's sucking my time out? But what is the stuff that would push the needle and move the company forward? And what are we not getting to that contributes to that? And it's really just taking that stock. You can do that in 60 minutes. That doesn't take long, even half an hour. You can do that. And quite quickly, most people will tell you, oh, I can tell you exactly where the problems are, Mark. Just don't know how to fix them. But it starts by looking at yourself. They do a thing, you probably heard of the blind review, where they get staff to critique
scary
bosses. Yeah, and all anonymous. And a lot of people get scared because, like, oh God, what are they going to say?
Yeah, I'm scared.
But what I've seen so many, I've been a part of these loads, hundreds of times, but I've seen so many times when the results kind of come through and when it's delivered. And when I'm sitting there with the business owner, just one-to-one or whatever, they say, it's nothing my wife hasn't said to me already. So you kind of already know, but you're not really admitting. You trust me, if it's there, and people see it. So it's self-reflection. And I think that if you ask me Mark, give me one answer that tells the person the problem. The lack of self-reflection, the outward focus and the lack of inward focus. That is the difference. Most people are outward focused, fix the stuff, and they're not inward focused at fix the problem. And I think that's the self-reflection. That's what it all begins on, that self-awareness.
Yeah, I mean, the bully in the school playground was never going to stop bullying you until you stood up.
Until you,
Until that moment where you said, no, he was never going to change until you took that moment to go, of looking inward and going, Mark, how long are you going to put up with this shit for?
basically.
It ends today.
And you know what? It's amazing that I was a child, but it's amazing that what it taught me, and I didn't realize what it taught me till later on I could put it into words, but it taught me that, we're responsible for our future, and, personally and professionally, we're very much responsible. And there's some stuff that we can't control, but we can always control how we respond. I remember Dr. Viktor Frankl wrote in his book, Man's Search for Meaning, powerful book. He says, between the stimulus and our reaction, there is a space. The what happened to you and how you respond, there's a space called choice. You get to choose always how you respond to what's going on or coming down the tracks, even if you can't control it. You always get to choose your response. And our response can be one of, okay, let's just knuckle down, we'll get through it. The response can be fear, oh my God, economy, what are we going to do? Or whatever. But you always get to choose the response. Some people's response in some scenarios is, that's that team again. Why can't anyone do it right? Or some people's response is, how do I empower them more? How do I communicate what's frustrating me? And when you look inwards before you look outward, that reflection is going to give you such clarity in how you conduct a meeting or an interview or a chat or whatever, because you're now coming from your perspective. And flipping the script, if that was you, would you like to be spoken to how you're feeling you want to speak to them right now? And it's all that self-reflection. But start looking inward before we go and kind of burn the bridges externally. And more often than not, I remember it was interesting that doctor told me this. We were talking about mediation at the time and stuff he was going through. And someone had told him this, and he shared it with me. He says, whenever you point your finger at someone, there's always 3 fingers pointing back. And I said, we need to remember that for life. And it's always true, because it's very easy to get caught up in thinking that it's everyone else's the problem. I'll even say it in life. You'd be surprised what people take from their growing up and, beliefs that they establish, in their life, and things that they can be convinced of are true when they're not true. And that can carry forward all the way, and I remember I worked with one guy who owned a business. He was in the mechanical kind of sector, so to speak, we call it that. And he never liked when someone, if he picked up disrespect. Now, don't get me wrong, respect is respect and should be there. But what he would interpret as disrespect is any level, and he would go from 0 to 100. And he had a real anger issue with it, because he'd been his childhood would kind of led him to this place. But he was so reactive to the slightest thing. If someone kind of went, really? Or something simple, he would lose it, like 0 to 100, like a lunatic. And he thought his team was all the problem. They don't get me, they don't understand, they're disrespectful. But really what it came down to, they weren't being disrespectful. He was interpreting disrespect. And his reaction was a reaction he'd always had. He didn't, and we had to work on, it's in that moment you need to be careful how you're reacting, and obviously works it through with him. But so many of us think that it's them, not me. And we react in certain ways because we've always reacted that way. And maybe it's time to sometimes question that, because you can go through life either believing you're a victim of life, or you can see yourself as being a victor of life. Life happens to me, or life happens for me. And both are 2 different perspectives. One puts you in the back seat, the other one puts you in the driver's seat. And I think that's what we always need to look at and say, even if something's not happy or not right, start working on the inside out, and you'll communicate it a whole lot better and much more empathy.
Often in these situations when we are communicating either in business or personal, we're communicating with people who challenge us. And I know you do a workshop on dealing with difficult people. So could you maybe give us some guidance on, someone's listening to this and they're going, okay, I hear you. I got to get some self-control over here. What are the practical tools that we can do when we next step into the office, or it could be through our front door or whatever, the family member?
Yeah.
When someone is in that, crisis situation and they're dealing with a very difficult person, are there some tools they can reach for to help that situation?
100%. Yeah, the course is the one I did on resilience and dealing with difficult people.
That's available on your website for people.
It is, yeah. And it's just kind of a very practical, workshop. It's actually a series of workshops. But the thing about it, I always say to people is this, and this is where I start with anyone I'm working on that's going through that kind of scenario, or maybe they're dealing with a narcissistic boss or, micromanager, whatever they might be going through. Your self-worth should never be defined by somebody else, and nor should it ever be defined by your credential, your career, or your business. So many of us say, that's what I do, that's who I am. A job is what you do, a business is what you own, but it's not who you are. And if it ever becomes who you are, it consumes you. Then people might say, well, if I'm not in that job, well, who am I? And that is something they'll end up asking themselves when they're 65 years of age and they've retired. And now they'll go, well, who am I if I'm not that person,
That's
not
the
that
question.
CEO? Yeah, I mean, I've, about half a dozen clients at the moment that are on exit strategies. Some have been bought over, some are still in the kind of golden handcuffs era, and some are on the end of kind of coming into retirement, not sure what they want to do, high performance their whole life. I've worked with athletes in the same. They retired at 35, and next thing they're like, oh, this is all I know was sport. Now what? Whenever you're dealing with difficulty, wherever else, start by if you can just get that understanding that your worth is never based on someone else or something else or someone else's opinion. The second thing I'll also say is people project more times than we realize. They're projecting onto you their world, their interpretations, their history even. And they're projecting onto you where they're coming from. And when we see it like that, we realize we start to say to ourselves, it's not about me.
Yeah.
Actually, their attitude, their insecurities, their controllingness, their narcissism, whatever, it's not about me. That's all them. What I have to be, if I'm in that job or that business or company, what I have to be in that moment is professional, not personal, because this isn't personal. If they make it personal, well, we have a HR conversation, but as long as we know, I just have to be professional. So I had a woman I worked with, and she had a boss who was completely narcissistic in many ways, right? Controlling, manipulative, gaslighting. Everyone loved him. No one thought he was bad, but everyone who worked with him knew how bad he was. Covert nurses. And she worked with him and she says, I love the job, but I hate it because of him, because he makes our life living hell. How do I deal with a difficult person like this? And I said, what if, I said, most people would say, I'll leave the job. Don't like the job, I'll leave the job. I said, but what if we could get you to a place where you could handle the job? And you were so resilient, he was water off a duck's back to you. And she said, oh my God, I'd love that. Don't know if it's possible, but I'd love that. And that's what we said about working on. And so how we worked on it was professional, not personal. His issue, not mine. But then there was the third piece about the whole self-worth thing. But the big thing that shifted for her was there's a line in the sand on how we should allow people to talk to us. There is bad behavior, there's good behavior. But here was the thing that really kind of drove it home. I said, the longer you can, provided he's not crossing the line now into, HR-ish in person or toxic. But I said, as long as you can tolerate him, it's like you working a muscle under pressure. It's like going to the gym and doing weights. The more resistance, the bigger that muscle, the stronger it gets. And she said, you're right. She had a total flip the script in her mind. When he sent an email, she said, I'm not going to fear the email. She says, because there's only so much I can control and I can only do my best. She ended up becoming the senior exec in that company. The first person I won't say the first person, but the person she was now over was him.
Mm-hmm.
In about 5 months of her being in that role, he left. She is still in that job today. She's a partner in that company. And she said the best lesson I ever dealt with was going and dealing with a difficult person and knowing how to deal with them and understand why they do what they do, not taking it personal. That takes work, that takes time, that takes coaching. But she said it was the best life lesson I ever learned. So see them as an exercise as much as one can. I know they're a problem, but taking that perspective and going, you know what, this is like a work. I'm going to see how professional I can be under pressure. And it will be the making of it. Because she said, it taught me stuff that made me so resilient and whatever. Now, obviously, there's lines again in the sand that should never be crossed. But it ended up being the worst thing that ever happened to her. But as she'll tell you herself, the best thing that also ever happened to me.
Well, what you've done there, it seems like you've shifted the focus about me going, complaining about this, difficult boss or difficult friend or whatever. And you've shifted that to, how can I learn from this? This is me going to the gym. I suspect that underlying a lot of what you've said and underlying a lot of the work, as you mentioned it there, is our self-worth.
Hmm. It is.
And
It is.
it seems to me, and I wonder in this Instagram world, or this world where there seems such a huge effort to present the perfect life. And I'm not sure it was before we came on camera or not, but I spoke about a couple of people I've worked with, including myself, by the way, 10, 15 years ago, where to the outside you go, this guy has everything, successful business, lovely house, all that sort of stuff. And other people can look very successful, and inside they're miserable. And I think ultimately, and I know I relate the second time I relate back to your bullying story, because I think it's a really powerful story. It is that self-worth.
It is.
Do you find that's a huge problem with people, or it's just
Well, let me tell you something that has surprised me and has been unbelievable. If you ask me over the last kind of couple of decades, the amount of male, female, but I definitely see women are far more, not to stereotypical, to be stereotyped, but women are far more self-aware, and they take to coaching so much better because they're able to communicate with themselves much better than we are. Emotional intelligence is much higher. A lot of the male, not all, but a lot of the men I've worked with, not the same. And when you talk about self-worth to a 50-year-old CEO, he kind of looks at you sideways and go, what is this? And when I tap into it and I show them how it's showing up, I've seen people, business is like sport. You've got competitors, and it's like sport. They're trying to get one up on you. You're trying to, beat them or whatever else. It's not a hate thing. It's just, we want to be the best.
Yeah.
And there's only one place to be the best. And the scarcity mindset comes in, and the insecurities come in. And next thing, they're obsessed with their competitor as if they're the enemy, and they're in fear of the enemy. And all they think about and all they talk about and all they focus on is what the competitor is doing. And they take their eye off the ball, essentially. They're just watching the other team. And that comes from an insecurity, and that comes from fear. And where the fear comes in is like, oh, but what if there's not enough? Scarcity mindset. There's always enough. That industry is saturated. Well, if it was saturated, Sony, Panasonic, LG, and Samsung, they wouldn't all create TVs that were so saturated. Yes, saturated, but, there's still room for everyone. So one of my point is, fear and self-worth are one of the biggest problems for business leaders, in my opinion, and nobody wants to talk about it. They all want to talk about operations. They all want to talk about team synergy, leadership, KPIs, bottom lines, strategies, marketing. They want to talk about everything else but self. But when you operate and work on yourself, it transforms everything about your business. And that's why the life coaching became part of my executive coaching, because I realized I could talk about business and strategy all day long, but I've got to deal with the man, the captain at the helm. He or she needs to realize that fear is driving this environment. Fear is driving them. Insecurity is driving them. Self-worth is driving them. They won't let anyone challenge them, so they control and repress everyone. Worst case scenario. So self-worth, whether you are 25 or 55, is a conversation I think everyone should have. Most people don't want to talk about it, but it's actually one of the driving forces when it comes to beliefs and values about oneself behind all that we do. How often are people making business decisions out of fear of what the others might do? We better do this, blah, 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 blah. Or is it more, when is it more out of fear when it should be more out of focus?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like a very, look, I agree. It's a scary conversation, but as you said earlier, if you don't change, nothing changes. Looking to your business to change without making any personal changes it's just never going to happen.
Dynasty, isn't it? Einstein, do the same thing over again, expect different results.
Yeah, I know it's true, but isn't that what we do? But I also think the value, again, my own life, the value of mentorship and coaching to me over the years has been in that conversation. I've come to realize that that's what I'm doing. But when we're in the habit of day in, day out doing the thing, we don't realize that we're that person doing the same thing and blaming others. And we kind of, you just, it slips by you. Then you sit in a conversation with a mentor or a coach or someone, and you begin, you hear your own voice speaking, you go, oh my God. I
It's the
think
ego. It's the ego. Like, you'll see
what
it in a
ego's
boardroom.
fear, isn't it?
Like, this is it. The ego is like, I always liken it like this, we've the heart and we've the head, the heart, and the ego. The head is the rational, figure out the detail. The heart is what we really want, the true self. And then you have the ego, which is like the teenager version of us. Doesn't want to be uncomfortable, doesn't want to have to do anything, wants everyone to be nice to us, wants to be popular, you know what I mean? And no one should threaten that. And if you do, you're going to hear about it. And whichever one of those three powers are in charge is going to define the outcome. I've had the opportunity to work, Ireland, UK, stateside, in Fortune 200, 100 company, and 500. And I've seen the same insecurities in the boardroom that I've seen in the small business, with maybe a staff of 20. It doesn't matter what level you're at, your self-worth goes with you. How you see yourself and your mindset, it goes with you. And someone might bounce around jobs. You're going to see the same problems unless you deal with them.
Yeah.
All goes back to that. Ego's at the door.
And the hardest place to look is to open our own door and look inside and go, hey, what do I need to do differently?
Yeah, of course.
How do I need to change? And I think maybe growing up, we've all, we're both Irishmen, and we're a great country for guilt. But I think, looking inside and finding things that you can improve, we're growing. It doesn't mean you were wrong. There's no blame. It's just growth.
You see, people sometimes interpret a disagreement as rejection. It's not. It's a disagreement. It's not rejection. And sometimes we do that. We say, oh, they disagreed with me and I'm feeling rejected. Now I want to win them back over again. No, you don't have to do that. A disagreement is not rejection.
Yeah.
Criticism doesn't mean you're failing. And we interpreted the worst case scenario. And when people talk to us or deal with us, it doesn't mean we're being attacked. It's critique, not attack. And sometimes our ego, our insecurities will see it that way and say, okay, criticism, bring it on. Let me know. I remember one person in a job say, all I ever do is get criticized. They give me a hard time, et cetera, et cetera. They're a manager and they're new in the role. I'm just told the only time I ever see my boss is when I'm doing something wrong and criticism. And I said, the first time that you've had a few days and no one contacting, I want you to make a point to go to the manager and say, listen, I said, take the power, right? I said, I'd love if we could sit down for coffees every other week and you give me any feedback you have. So now they were taking control in a way to say, I want these meetings of criticism or critique, constructive criticism, and implemented them. They did it about twice. And the manager said, I love this enthusiasm. I love the fact you're all over it. I'll only let you know when there's a problem. And there was never that criticism again because they flipped the script. They showed the boss that they were open and eager. And the boss kind of went, you have it now. So sometimes we have to understand that don't let the ego take the driver's seat. Just ask it, look at it practically. Be professional, not personal.
And embrace the challenge. Embrace the challenge. Mark, it's been a great conversation. I've learned so much from chatting to you, and I've really, really enjoyed it. I want to point people to your website because which is it markfennell.ie?
That's the one, 2 N's and 2 L's, Mark Fennell.
Well, I'm going to put in the show notes anyway. I want to point people to your website because there's a lot of great resources on that. There's some online courses that are very, very inexpensive. There's a book that you can download. I downloaded it myself. The 7 Mindset Block Sabotaging, or the Clarity Code. That's it. Which actually lists through the mindset blocks. I thought we might get to them, but we've run out of time. But I would really encourage people to download that. I think, as I was reading through it, I thought they're very, very practical steps. They're very practical steps, and
it's short and it's sweet. It's a cup of coffee. You'll read a chapter kind of,
and you'll recognize yourself in it. I think that's the thing. Maybe not know, but you'll recognize yourself. Mark, it's been an absolute pleasure, and I think thank you for the time you've given us because I think you've shared the audience with a huge amount of value. I will stick all your details in the show notes, and I encourage people to check you out and reach out to you. Mark, it's been a pleasure.
That's it. If they want more on difficult people or dealing with that, Instagram, I share quite a bit on there. So that's just markfennell.ie. So yeah, so find me and you'll find something that might help.
We will share that as well. Mark, it's been a pleasure.
Same, likewise.